Good evening, everybody. This is Sunday, April 19th. I'm going to be giving you three assignments at the end of my little bit of mini lecture here. And I'll also put those three assignments on Power School Learning either tonight or tomorrow morning. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody's healthy and safe. Looking at the assignments, everybody did a really nice job on the four assignments that I gave last week. So let's go ahead and review those a little bit before we move on to your new assignments. Uh, I talked about that Shays Rebellion was the tip of the iceberg on why we had to get rid of the Articles of Confederation. You guys did a really good job as far as researching that and explaining what Shays Rebellion was, what it was when Daniel Shays and a group of farmers took over the state house and state capitol, trying to get to the armory and basically take over the state of Massachusetts. It was very frightening for the government. State militia came in and put it down, but it just showed this new government that you can't let a bunch of people in one state try to take over a country or let alone a state, and use it militarily that way to do it. So that was probably the biggest threat to this country at the end of the Articles of Confederation. So they decided in 1787 in May to get together in Philadelphia to basically change the Articles, but as they got going, they knew that they had to scrap it and build a whole new Constitution. And on the rules of the Constitution, you guys did a really good job on that. The three main rules were, again, like you said, like most of you wrote down, every state on all matters, they only got one vote per state, no matter how many delegates they brought to the convention in Philly. All decisions, when they finally did make a decision, out of the states that were there at the convention, because many came back and forth, there was a simple majority would have to decide, and the majority would win as far as decisions would go during the convention. And also, probably the toughest one, that sessions would be held in secret, and outside press was not allowed. No speaker, nobody could come in and watch and listen. All windows, doors were shut. They said most time in Philadelphia that summer was 95 degrees, stifling humidity. The way these men dressed didn't help matters any, as well as they had almost an overcoat on every one of these guys, the old way that they used to dress. So not very conducive to being very comfortable in these meetings as well. I also ask you to figure out what the importance of these four men, Wilson, Franklin, Washington, and Madison, were. And you guys did a really good job with that, with James Wilson basically putting together a lot of details of the Constitution behind the scenes that Madison had already put in place. Wilson did a lot of finalization of Madison's plan. And speaking of Madison, we call him the father of the Constitution because basically it was his plan, that what the Constitution looks like today. He was planning at nighttime as everybody got done with the meetings during the day. He would go back, and he brought 20 to 30 books with him from Virginia when he came there. He was studying, putting together, taking different parts of other people's laws and government throughout Europe that already had been done and maybe tried, and that Madison liked. And together we had the Constitution. So he borrowed a lot from other countries. Franklin, even though he was the most elderly person there, he's 81 years old, he just gave the public a bit of trust that he was probably one of the most influential people in American history, the inventor, statesman, negotiator, diplomat, you name it. Having him sit on the meetings was just gave the public a lot of confidence that he was there. As George Washington, he was the leader of the convention, him being having such a great role in the French Indian War, that and then during the Revolutionary War as well, people looked up to him very highly and thought he'd be a great leader of the convention. He didn't do this as much as people as they wanted him to do, but nonetheless he chose to go. Uh, the last thing I asked you to do on your assignment was to give me the difference between the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan. It was the first big disagreement at the convention. And we all know that I've talked about many times before, we have the executive, legislative, judicial branches of the government. And the biggest sticking point, even though they did fight over the executive branch, they did fight over the judicial branch, but the hardest part was figuring out how the legislative branch should be set up. The New Jersey plan was, again, they wanted one house legislature. Everybody got equal amount of members, so everybody would be. So the best way to say it would be even on everything. Every state would have two votes. And the Virginia plan based both their houses on population. The bigger states with the most population thought they should be having the most say because of the most people. If you have a democracy or republic, more people, the more say. Well, the small states weren't going to let that go down because they would get outvoted on everything. So Roger Sherman of Connecticut, they called him the Great Compromiser, came in with a system which made everybody happy. He said, let's have one house, have a lower house, be based on population, which make the big states happy, and then the upper house will be based on equality. Each state will have two votes or two men, and everybody will get what they want. In Madison, everybody had a compromise that wouldn't have went on very much longer. So they agreed on the Great Compromise, and it looks exactly like we have it today. Well, the other thing that they really disagreed on was now that one of the houses is going to be based on population, how do we count slaves? And the southern states wanted all the slaves counted as a person. That would be great for them because they could add all the slaves to their population, would give them more representatives, which would give them more power, which would keep slavery for as long as the foreseeable future. Well, the northern states did not want the southern states to count African slaves as population because then they would never get rid of slavery. At the time of the Constitution, most northern states had already given up slavery anyway. So they compromised, they fought back and forth, and they finally came up with a compromise called the Three-Fifths Compromise, which meant that all the southern states that had slaves would count up the total number of slaves, and whatever that number was, 3/5 of that number they could use towards total population for their whole population, and that would be the population of African American slaves, 3/5 of that of slaves, and the rest of the white population, that would be the state's population, and they could use that number towards representatives. The North knew that they had to give in some. I'm sure they didn't want to count any slave as population, but the southern states were not going to back down on this. So 3/5 was the best they could possibly get it. Now the deal was with the Constitution, 9 out of 13 states would have to ratify this Constitution, meaning the votes would go back to all 13 states, and the people would decide. People could vote, which were men, which would be white men over 21, and they had some part of power of the government, or they were wealthy, or they were well educated. People got to vote, and every state had a ratification vote. And once they said they had 9 out of 13 states that agreed upon the Constitution, then the Constitution would actually would start. Well, if they finalized Constitution in September of 1787, they went to ratification votes for another year, and it wasn't until 1788 when New Hampshire became the 9th state in the U.S. to ratify the Constitution, and then the Constitution can legally start. But a lot of people still did not want the Constitution because it didn't contain a Bill of Rights. Well, finally in that year, Madison agreed to put a Bill of Rights, 10 additional rights for individuals, people, along to the Constitution, and that made a lot of people happy. They were willing to go sign on the Constitution because those amendments were added. Long story short, here's what I want you to do. Looking at the Constitution is one of the greatest documents in American history. And the preamble of the Constitution starts out the Constitution. That's part 1 of the Constitution, the preamble. What I want you to do with the preamble is this one thing. I want you to take each part of the preamble and explain what all 6 parts of the preamble mean. And those 6 parts will be put on Power School Learning. So for example, the first part of the preamble, which says, in order to form a more perfect union, okay? Number 2 would be establish justice. The part 3 would be ensure domestic tranquility. 4 would be provide for the common defense. 5 would be promote the general welfare. And 6 would be to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. What I want you to do with each one of those parts is explain in your own words which one of those 6 parts of the preamble, what they mean in your words, or what you look up, and you can find some website that'll explain what each of those parts mean. So that's assignment number 1, to take all 6 parts of the preamble and explain in your words what those 6 parts mean. Assignment number 2, the main meat of the Constitution is what was written by Madison, was written into what was called the 7 Articles. And what I want you to do is I just want you to list the 7 articles. So, for example, Article 1 deals with the legislative branch. So that's all you put. Article 1, legislative branch. Do that for all 7 articles. Part 3 is a little bit tougher, but you'll be able to find 1,000 websites that'll tell you this. Part 3 is I want you to look at the first 10 amendments of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. And a lot of the states were having a hard time ratifying the Constitution because there was not a Bill of Rights that came up during the Constitutional Convention. It was later added by Madison a year later. Well, what I want you to do with the Bill of Rights is this. I want you to take all 10 amendments and tell me what rights American citizens have in each amendment. So, for example, amendment number one, you have 5 rights: the rights to religion, the right to freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and you have the right to petition the government. So you would put those 5 rights for amendment number 1. Example, amendment number 2, you have the right to own a firearm or a weapon. So for each 10 amendments, Bill of Rights, explain to me what rights are in each one of those amendments that we American citizens have. Some of the amendments have more rights than one, so be on the lookout for multiple rights in some of the amendments. But that's what I want you to do in assignment number 3. So again, let me review again. On assignment number 1, take the 6 parts of the preamble, meaning these were the 6 goals that Madison put down. And they put the 6 goals of the Constitution in the preamble, and take those 6 goals and explain what each one of those goals meant in your own words. The second assignment is to list the 7 articles of the Constitution. And number 3, third assignment is on the Bill of Rights. Make sure that you put down all the rights that were guaranteed as a U.S. citizen in each one of the 10 amendments. Okay? If you have questions, even after you look at Power School Learning tomorrow, please email me. Hope everybody's doing good. I have to finish this before 8 o'clock because I want to watch the Michael Jordan special at 8 o'clock. I can't wait. Been waiting for this all week. So, got to look forward to some good news. MJ, go Bulls. Over and out.